Another stark reminder that the situation in Gaza stands as one of the gravest challenges to international peace and security. The immense scale of human suffering and the implications for regional stability demand our urgent and united attention. This is not an abstract challenge, but measured in lives lost every day. Nearly 2 years have passed since Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7, 2023. In that time, more than 64,000 people have been killed. The humanitarian crisis worsens each day, with people in Gaza, particularly women, children, and other vulnerable groups, facing constant threats to their lives and safety. Equally troubling is the famine now unfolding in Gaza. According to the recent IPC report, more than 500,000 people are already facing famine. The crisis is projected to spread to Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis in the coming weeks. We must prevent any further devastation for civilians already in desperate conditions. In this difficult context, the Republic of Korea remains gravely concerned about Israel's recent attack in Qatari territory. This act is unacceptable. It not only violates the territorial sovereignty of the state of Qatar, one of the key mediating countries, but also jeopardizes ongoing negotiations to achieve an immediate ceasefire and secure the release of all hostages held by Hamas. We reaffirm our full support for the tireless mediation efforts of the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. We commend the unwavering commitment of Qatar's diplomatic mediation, which remains indispensable to ending the cycle of violence and creating a pathway toward stability.
And Mr. President, Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering support for the Palestinian people in their just struggle for dignity, justice, and self-determination through the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and contiguous Palestinian state on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Pakistan welcomes the two-state solution conference chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We also commend the recent recognitions of the state of Palestine by numerous member states, a step that reflects adherence to justice and the principle of international law. Pakistan had the honor to be among the first few countries to recognize the state of Palestine following the Declaration of Independence in 1988. This positive momentum must be sustained with resolute determination, seriousness of purpose, and an unwavering commitment to achieving a just and lasting solution.
Mr. President, Gaza has become a textbook example of failure of international community. It has become a place in which people dread the nightfall and fear what a new day will bring. Gaza has become the deadliest place for children, the deadliest place for humanitarian and medical workers, and the deadliest place for journalists. The place of first ever proclaimed famine in the Middle East, marked by continuous offensives and strikes against hospitals, schools, homes, shelters, and holy places. It is defined by death and despair, and where hostages suffer and civilians count heartbeats left. Gaza is a man-made catastrophe which is live-streamed across the globe and sustained by those acting in contradiction to everything we stand for: And I appeal to all of us. Do not let the future of Israeli people be defined by terrorism and violence. Do not let the future of Palestinian people be defined by occupation and perpetual human rights violations. And I appeal to you, do not let our collective future to be defined by the stain of the Gaza genocide. Act now. There is no bigger threat to international peace and security than a cycle of violence perpetrated by continuous fear, everlasting hate, and uncertain future. The stories of children starved to death, a threat of a population displaced, and a territory in fear should be all we need for us to understand that the time for the immediate, permanent, and unconditional ceasefire is now.
This Council does not have to solve riddles anymore, now that the Israeli occupation itself is boasting about its achievements. The Israeli aggression is first aiming at undermining any prospect for the establishment of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state, not on the ground alone, but also in the minds of people, if possible. Second, the Israeli occupation aims at redrawing the borders in the region based on its imagination and its illusions, basing itself on the most dangerous myth, which is the myth of Greater Israel. Third and last, the Israeli occupation aims at entrenching its absolute monopoly over the region and at having the final say in that region, to attack whomever they want, whenever they want, and however they want. They give no regard to international law, nor to the UN Charter, and not even to the merest rules and customs related to civilized coexistence.
Guided by the UN Charter, international law, and the rule of law, we emphasize the following key points. First, a complete cessation of hostilities in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and an irreversible political process leading to a permanent ceasefire. The parties to the conflict must recommit to ongoing peace efforts and take concrete steps that will prevent further atrocities. We acknowledge and commend the efforts of the mediators, Egypt and Qatar, and the United States to achieve this end. Second, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, including Israeli civilians held by Hamas and Palestinian detainees held without due process. The immediate and unconditional lifting of the aid restrictions and restoration of full and unhindered humanitarian access. We emphasize the role of the United Nations and its partners, including UNRWA, to achieve this end.
The war in Gaza has also become a catalyst for pressure, political pressure, which seems to be the only way the occupying power might respond to the international outcry against the genocidal acts being perpetuated against Palestinians. Ghana calls on the member states of the United Nations to ensure that their engagements with the State of Israel do not in any way contribute to prolonging the war in Gaza and the Israeli oppression of the Palestinian people. It took a collective effort to dismantle the system of apartheid in South Africa, and Guyana firmly believes that an equally strong and organized international response is needed to ensure the end of the occupation of the Palestinian territory. I must underscore the importance of recognition of the State of Palestine by all UN member states as a pivotal part of forcing an end to the Israeli occupation.
But friends also have to speak the truth to each other. And today we must face the fact that Israel's war in Gaza has created a humanitarian catastrophe of unbearable scale. Israel must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. The human suffering in Gaza must be brought to an end, and it must happen now. Tens of thousands of civilians have already been killed, including over 18,000 children. This constitutes a classroom of children every day. It constitutes a humanitarian and human failure of unprecedented scale. We are witnessing an ongoing expanding military operation in Gaza City. Children starving with no access to clean water or medicine. Doctors forced to amputate without sedation. Mothers powerless to feed their babies. A famine unfolding before our eyes. While the World Food Programme alone has enough food to feed Gaza.
Yesterday, alongside other ministers here in New York this week, I hosted a session to hear from doctors who have recently returned from Gaza. And the stories they told would stay with me forever. One told of the screams of toddlers, and the scream of a toddler who she had operated on without full anesthetics, and how she hoped and prayed that he would not feel pain. Another told of the seriously malnourished pregnant women affecting their babies, and they talked about doctors and nurses whose family members were killed but who still came back to work in hospitals in unimaginable conditions to help others. And they told of how the absolute basics of modern medicine, like antibiotics and anesthetics, things that we around this council table take for granted for ourselves and our loved ones, were unavailable, blocked and denied. And we say the words humanitarian crisis, but this is what it means, the pain and the screams of a toddler who cannot get the basic health care that they need. After 2 years of bloodshed, I believe the world is united in wanting this awful war to end, united in wanting all the hostages released, united in rejection of any role for Hamas in the future of Gaza or the future of a Palestinian state, united in wanting Israel to unblock aid and end the humanitarian catastrophe, and united in wanting a better and more peaceful future for the region, with the reconstruction of Gaza, the dignity for its people, and a new era of relations to support their collective security. And that future must be based on a two-state solution. The UK's historic recognition of the state of Palestine this week is part of our commitment to peace, part of acting to protect the viability of the two-state solution as the only path to a just and lasting peace and to security for Palestinians and Israelis alike, part of rejecting extremist ideas on all sides, which involve too often fantasies of the destruction of the state of Israel or expulsion of the Palestinian population. We reject both of those, and part of our wider effort to work with partners on a long-term peace, not just to halt the immediate crisis, but advance a pragmatic plan for what comes next.
President, however remote or difficult the prospect may seem today, the two-state solution remains the only viable path forward. We need to provide the Palestinian people with a credible prospect of hope for the future. This is an indispensable condition for peace, stability, and security in the region, including the long-term security of Israel. We appreciate in this vein the leadership demonstrated by France and Saudi Arabia in co-chairing the two-state solution conference. We stand by all international initiatives, including the relevant global alliance and the Arab plan, towards realizing this vision. We will continue to contribute to every effort that revives the political process towards a two-state solution, a political process which we firmly believe must lead to the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state through a revitalized and comprehensive approach, and which is essential for lasting peace and stability in the region.
President, we remain gravely concerned about the continued escalation of Israeli military operations in Gaza. As we speak, these military operations are expanding rapidly, and for the 2 million people still trapped in Gaza, it's a death sentence, literally and figuratively. Since this war began, over 65,000 Palestinians have been killed, the majority of them women and children. Last month's IPC report has removed all doubts about what's happening in Gaza. Famine is no longer looming. It is taking place now. It is taking place now in front of our all eyes. The death of children from hunger and disease is not a forecast. It's a daily reality. Let us be absolutely clear. This is a man-made disaster created through siege, blockade, and systematic obstruction of humanitarian aid. The starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited, and the use of hunger as a collective punishment is a grave violation of international law. We must act with moral clarity. First, we reiterate our call for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire. It's clear that there is no military solution to this conflict. Somalia recognizes and supports the ongoing ceasefire efforts led by Qatar, the United States, and Egypt, and commends their unwavering commitment. The Israeli airstrikes on residential areas in Doha, the capital of Qatar, on September 9th mark a grave and perilous escalation. It's appalling that this military airstrike unfolded when negotiators were engaged in talks over a US-backed ceasefire proposal. We stress that mediators must not be targeted, but they should be protected to ensure a pathway to peace remains viable.
President, yesterday, the President of the French Republic announced France's recognition of the State of Palestine. This gesture reflects a profound conviction: the security of Israel and justice for the Palestinians are inseparable. They can only be guaranteed through the coexistence of two sovereign and democratic states living side by side in peace and security, with Jerusalem as their capital. This decision, shared by many other countries, opens a political path that we must consolidate. This path is structured around a roadmap, the New York Declaration, which France, along with Saudi Arabia and many partners, submitted and had adopted by the General Assembly, thanks to the support of 142 states. This roadmap is based on two essential stages. The first, the emergency phase, aims to secure the release of hostages, the cessation of hostilities, and large-scale humanitarian access. We call on all parties concerned to resume negotiations as soon as possible and in good faith. In this regard, we commend the tireless mediation efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States.
I find it, and we find it deeply regrettable that Council members have opted to convene this high-level UN Security Council briefing on Gaza on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, knowing full well that that decision excludes Israel. And frankly, colleagues, it's a testament to how this council has prioritized a lot of performance over serious efforts to actually advance peace. Serious efforts that President Trump, Secretary Rubio, his team, and partners like Egypt and Qatar are engaged in right now as we speak, to end this horrific war. Unilateral recognition statements do not alter the reality on the ground. It does not alter the fact that there is not a Palestinian state to recognize. And at this point, there is no credible Palestinian partner for peace. The Palestinian Authority leaders from Ramallah are absent from New York this week because they failed to meet their Oslo commitments. The commitments were basic, including renouncing terrorism, renouncing violence, resolving issues through direct negotiations with Israel. The Palestinian Authority has failed to clear even those low bars. And their attempts to bypass negotiations through what can only be called lawfare, including at the ICC and at the ICJ, and its pushes for unilateral recognition of statehood. This charade it's disappointing. It is clearly fueled by domestic politics and has given Hamas a reward for refusing to surrender, as well as an incentive. They're now incentivized to hold on, keep holding the hostages in subhuman conditions.
Third, we must rectify the historical injustices suffered by the Palestinian people. Israel has long established itself as an independent state. The Palestinian people, however, remain without a homeland. This is the root of the problem. The two-state solution as the only viable way to solve the Palestinian question is irreplaceable and must not be denied. Yesterday, the Younger High-Level International Conference on a Two-State Solution once again issued a strong call in support of the two-state solution. A number of Western countries have recently recognized the state of Palestine one after another. The international community should sustain the current momentum, strive to revitalize the prospect for the two-state solution, and support the early establishment of an independent Palestinian state and its early admission as a full member state of the United Nations. Both Gaza and the West Bank are inalienable parts of the Palestinian territory. We must resolutely oppose unilateral actions that undermine the foundations of the two-state solution. Any day-after governance and reconstruction arrangements must respect the will of the Palestinian people and uphold the legitimate rights of the Palestinian nation.
Both Israel and the United States continue to claim that West Jerusalem is acting humanely in its fight against terrorism. This is how official Israeli reports justify strikes on hospitals and schools, attacks on humanitarian convoys, and the deaths of women, children, and aid workers. Hate speech and propaganda bring ordinary Israeli soldiers to kill dozens of innocent Palestinian civilians daily, sincerely believing that this is all for the greater good of the Israeli state. In this way, for nearly 2 years, West Jerusalem has been systematically constructing and imposing a distorted narrative in which Palestinians are second-class people who can be exterminated, displaced, starved, and killed even directly at humanitarian aid distribution points. UN leadership, its humanitarian bodies, and even member states calling for a ceasefire and humanitarian access are unabashedly labeled by Israeli representatives as terrorist accomplices. This radical, distorted rhetoric, along with West Jerusalem's clear intent to continuously escalate the situation in the region, a situation that is already drawn in Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Yemen, and Qatar, undermines any progress towards a peaceful resolution of the Middle East crisis. It is also clear that Israel's strategic endgame is to take full control of all Palestinian territory, both Gaza and the West Bank. Annexation plans are discussed openly, not only without hesitation, but with pride and a sense of fulfilling a historic mission. And these are not just empty words. Gaza is being systematically cleared, carved up into so-called security zones that shrink by the day. The West Bank is being built up with new Israeli settlements, and fanatical settlers in the world's worst traditions of the colonialism of past centuries abuse the Palestinian population and drive them from their homelands as the authorities stand by and do nothing. An aggressive settlement policy is being actively implemented, one where Palestinians are at best relegated to the role of ghetto residents and at worst to exiles.
President, the Palestinian people have suffered from the denial of their existence for decades. Now they are being confronted yet again with an attempt to destroy our nation altogether. Recognition of the State of Palestine is an affirmation that the world rejects such denial, rejects the attempts at our destruction, and supports our right to existence, our right to self-determination. And that is not a gift, this is a right, and the Palestinian people have been struggling for almost 100 years for the attainment of such a right. It was not born recently. It is also a clear indication that the international community refuses to abandon the rule of international law and refuses to abandon the two-state solution, the only path to regional peace and security. This recognition is not taking place in a vacuum. It is an integral part of the international mobilization to end this horrific war and move towards peace.
President, my capital city, Oslo, is in many ways synonymous with those efforts thanks to the Oslo Accords that created the Palestinian Authority back in 1993. Ever since, my country has worked towards one goal: peace, security, and dignity for the Palestinians and the Israelis, living side by side in two sovereign states, enjoying the rights and obligations that follow from the Charter of the United Nations. Norway recognized the State of Palestine in May last year. That was a hand to those on both sides who seek peaceful solution. And I need to say on behalf of those who recognized Palestine yesterday, doing so is turning the back on terror. It is turning the back on Hamas. It is taking the voice away from them and handing it to the peaceful part of the Palestinian overwhelming majority who want to live with rights and obligation under the Charter.
President, we are meeting today while the tragedy in Gaza has been going on for more than 2 years. The brave and defenseless Palestinian people are facing an unfair blockade, a huge devastation. They have lost thousands of innocent civilians, the numbers of which have exceeded 60,000 martyrs, mostly women and children. What is happening is the Gaza Strip is the living example of genocide and ethnic cleansing. It is a bleeding wound in the conscience of humanity that cannot be left unanswered. We have been following with great concern the recent military escalation, and we strongly condemn the Israeli attacks against the brotherly state of Qatar. And we unambiguously affirm that any violation of the security of any Gulf state is an attack against all the GCC countries. Our security is one, our stance is one, and our destiny is one. Mr. President, it has become clear that the Israeli war machine cannot be stopped with appeals alone. The leaders of occupation, intoxicated by racist illusions and religious extremism and extremist nationalism, have been stripped from all humanity and morality. What is required is strict punitive measures that convey the right message, which is that the world today does not accept that genocide be part of its vocabulary. We deeply regret the failure of this Council, time and again, and most recently, a few days ago, to put an end to the genocidal war waged by Israel on Gaza. This war that has lost even its military logic, if it ever had such a logic. The use by a permanent member of the Security Council of the veto right for the 6th time to prevent the adoption of a resolution that puts an immediate end to war emboldens the leaders of the occupation to continue perpetrating crimes and horrors indefinitely. What is happening in Gaza will not remain confined in Gaza, and the plan carried out by Israel relentlessly to reoccupy the Gaza Strip and to displace its inhabitants will destabilize security in the entire region. It will expand the circle of conflict, and it will create ongoing hotspots of tension and violence. It is time for this Council to make the right decision, morally and practically, to end this war that has entered the realm of madness and which has no logic anymore except blind revenge against 2 million Palestinians, most of whom are women and children.
That is why European Union is pulling other levers to try and push the Israeli government to change its course of action. We recently proposed sanctions on extremist ministers in the Israeli government, sanctions on violent settlers in the West Bank and entities supporting their impunity, additional sanctions on Hamas terrorists, and the suspension of trade concessions with Israel. This is a message to current Israeli government: change course and address the humanitarian suffering. In addition, another fundamental question hangs over us: how to square Israel's legitimate right to live in safety and security with the future Palestinian state. We have always believed that there is one answer: two states side by side. As we saw during yesterday's conference, the weight of the world is behind the two-state solution. The European Union has worked hard to make this possible.
We note that the actions of the Israeli occupying power amount to ethnic cleansing, illegal blockade, the use of starvation as a weapon of war, and colonial settlement and apartheid policies, acts of settler colonialism and terrorism. Land confiscation and home demolition, including attacks on Islamic and Christian holy sites, are acts of genocide and crimes against humanity and constitute a grave violation of the historic status quo at the holy sites of Jerusalem. Consequently, we reaffirm the decision of the 21st Extraordinary Council of Foreign Ministers held in Jeddah, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, on 25 August 2025 on the significance of the case presented to the International Court of Justice on Israel's violation of the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We, therefore, call on the Council to take the urgent measures to hold Israel accountable for these genocidal acts, including invoking Chapter 7 measures to bring a halt to the bloodshed and all of these crimes and to ensure the protection of the Palestinian people.
Israeli intentions toward Gaza and the Palestinian cause are no longer hidden. Israeli statements and moves unravel a genuine attempt to re-engineer the Palestinian presence in Gaza. This includes the displacement of a large portion of the population through military operations, starvation, and the elimination of livelihood in Gaza. The current ground military operation to storm Gaza City is only part of this subversive scheme. Egypt affirms its total rejection to this plan and its consequences. Such measures lack any legal or moral basis. It threatens the peace that has existed for almost 5 decades in a way unimaginable.
Efforts undertaken by Qatar, alongside Egypt and the United States of America, have been broadly welcomed. The Council, in its resolution, has declared the importance of these efforts. However, these efforts have been thwarted by Israel's attack on a residential zone in Doha in Qatar, where civilians lived. civilians and expatriates. During this attack, a member of our domestic security forces, aged 22, was killed, and several other people were injured in this attack. This is a blatant violation of our sovereignty and also international humanitarian law and the UN Charter. This is a direct attack on international law as a way of resolving conflicts. Mediators need to be protected. This is not a political issue. This is a basic principle to uphold security. International solidarity with Qatar has been